Here we go. I'm on that dope again, I'm on that floor again, switch up the floor again, yeah. Fly in the parachute, gripping that pole again, I'm on that pole again, yeah. Before we start today's video, I want to introduce Cooper Durant, my son, to you guys. He's only 12 days old at this time, and mommy's gonna watch him while we go work in the car. I got some bad news. I truly feel like this BMW M4 is just trying to end me. What I mean by that is, you guys have noticed I have not been posting videos about this car, and the reason being is when I finished the car, I pulled it out in the sun, and within about 2 hours of baking out in the sun, all the bodywork has failed, front and the back, which is absolutely so embarrassing to me because I was trying to make this car perfect. And I thought it was really cool doing the carbon fiber and stud conversion, but it's so bad there's nothing we can do to fix it at this time, where I've ordered a new Shroud kit. And we're just gonna bolt it on, not modify it, and then maybe later on, we'll redo the bodywork on the front fenders and we'll mold it and make it out of carbon fiber. I think that'd be a pretty cool touch. But that's not what today's video is about. So when we did finish this car, we pulled out in the sun and we started it, and the car was like in limp mode. After diagnosing and figuring things out, we have found that the Valvetronic motor has failed. So we replaced that, but we were still having some codes that would not go away, so that ended up being the Vanos. I didn't document any of that because it was just such a mess and such a disappointment, because we spent 6 months with this thing in the garage and we started up and it's broken. And the curse has continued. I have not done an oil change in 4,000 miles. I have been daily driving this thing. But I did an oil change finally, and every time I do an oil change I like to check the oil filter just to be safe, make sure everything is running right with the car. The car has 40,000 miles on it. It does have regular turbos, clutches. It does not have any fueling mods. It's a full bolt-on car other than fueling mods. The car is on an off-the-shelf tune from Bootmod 3, and here's where I'm confused, and here's what sucks. Do you see all that metal? Every spec is metal. Keep in mind that's only the beginning part of the filter. Again, this car only has 40,000 miles and it's not really modded. I've only owned the car for about 9,000 miles, and I'm afraid to hurt this car, actually the silver car, because my silver car we had a lot of issues with and it ended up blowing up and catching on fire. I didn't want this on this build. I just want to enjoy it, have a cool sounding car with upgraded turbos. I might go over 4,000 RPM once every 3-4 months. I don't throttle this car, I baby it. The only thing that I do aggressively is downshift, and that still doesn't go over 4,000 RPMs. So why is what appears to be my bearings going out? Why is my bearings? I don't know. It's not very common with these cars. But we're at the point where the metal shaving is so bad, well, I don't think it's just the crank bearings, I think it's the main bearings as well, which means we need to pull this motor out and rebuild the motor. I don't know what your experience is with these S55s, but I have had some terrible luck for these things supposedly being like bulletproof. That's a lie. Even the very first mod I did on this thing was a crank hub upgrade. I mean, I just didn't want to risk it. I didn't want anything to do with this motor, and here we are. I'm literally gonna start this car one last time. I'm gonna angle it right here, and we're gonna start pulling the motor out. And here's something else. I've never pulled the motor out necessarily solo. I've done a 335i, but I wasn't the main guy doing it. I was just backup. And I've also never rebuilt the motor. I've always been afraid to timing. I've always wanted to outsource, which was usually Matt at Sierra Performance, to do this kind of work. But at this point, I've done everything to the car. I need to learn. This is the opportunity. And my boy Ethan, which is a local, he builds BMW motors. He's gonna help me along the way. Wish me luck. I'm not gonna lie, this is pretty depressing. The fact that this car seems to be running completely normal, there's nothing wrong with it. But I can tell you, if we keep driving like this, for how much wear there's gotta be on those bearings, I can't risk the motor. and that fact that we're pulling it out right before Gatlinburg. The only reason why I haven't taken this car apart the past 3 months is because I wanted to drive it like this for Gatlinburg, Tennessee for Slammedenuff, and then I want to bring it back and then start version 2. Turns out version 2 is going to take a lot longer than I intended, but version 2 is actually starting on this car. It's a new color, new wide body, new aero. It is going to be even more wicked than what this car is right now. Fortunately, now it's going to have a rebuilt motor. Oh, I'm stressing here. Nothing else to do but to get to it. So first things first is we need to open the hood, take the hood off, take the bumper off, and then the front lip off. And then at that point, we'll start taking apart all the components inside the motor. As you heard the car start, it sounds completely normal. But those metal shavings still indicate the fact that there is some sort of failure from maybe the rods. And if you have a rod bearing fail, it can actually seize your rod onto your crank and it could throw basically a rod and piston through the motor. I could be slightly wrong. Again, I don't really build performance cars, but my basic knowledge is bearing fails, engine can basically fail. Right now the engine hasn't failed, but it could be internally scored or damaged. There could be metal shavings that are going up and down the cylinders, scoring the walls. We might need to re-machine that. We might need to replace the crank if the crank is scored where the bearing actually sits. There's a lot of factors that could change the entire engine situation. Right now, all I plan on doing is taking it apart, observing the motor, figuring out what we need to order. Whether it's going to be just new bearings, or do we need to go ahead and refinish the crank and then buy bearings that fit it. Does that make sense? I hope it does. I'll try to help if we get to that point. And just like that, the front bumper is off. I don't think I ever really showed you that front lip, how crazy it is. I built it out of wood, and then we just sanded it down and wrapped it over. It looks really good, really strong. It's not gonna just break on you. Now the bumper's off, I have to work on getting the front lip off, then all the under panels, and then start stripping the top. I don't necessarily want to bore you with that because I've done it so many times on this channel. So, as usual, let's start that time lapse. Yep. As easy as that. So after my wife and I get that hood removed, I start taking off the front lip. It's not bad. It's like 2 bolts in the back, 2 on each side, and then 4 in the middle. So quick and easy. I decided to start taking off all the titanium hardware that holds the carbon strut, the plastics, the aluminum strut. I don't quite take off the intakes just yet, but I do decide to take a break and go underneath the car. We take off this underbelly pan, which I've noticed has just gotten really corroded. So I had a bright idea. Let's go ahead and drain the oil, and then on the side while we wait, let's start polishing this under tray. Here in a second, you'll see me doing it by hand, just testing to see if it's even like feasible or easy to do. And it turned out it was. So I decided to get the buffer out and let's just full send and polish this. It took probably 5-10 minutes and it turned out freaking fantastic. It looked so good where I got carried away. I ended up doing the aluminum strut brace that's on the top side of the motor. And off camera, I also did my oil filter housing. I also did my door latches and also my tunnel brace. So let's see what else I end up polishing before V2 is over with. Drain coolant. Coolant drips for several days. That is never fun, especially when it gets your armpit. I pull off the oil cooler, I pull off the intakes, the charge pipes, the engine cover, then the coolant reservoir, and then I take off water-cooled intercooler. After that, start removing coolant lines, wiring. The goal is to strip it down to start getting the intake manifold off, which carries the ECU, meaning there's ridiculous amounts of wiring that goes right underneath the intake manifold. The intake manifold is the hardest part of pulling the motor out, to be honest, for me. I think it's just the wiring, and I'm nervous about getting it back together. We take out the rear diffuser so that we can drop the exhaust. We have to drop the exhaust so that we can drop the downpipes, which are in the way to pull the motor. But I am doing V2, so in my head I'm like, well, I know I'm doing a custom rear diffuser, and I want to see if I can cut the bottom half to fit a diffuser. What I'm trying to figure out is if the battery box location you see on the right is in the way. I'm considering cutting that out and raising it into the trunk, but that's undecided at this time. There goes the fan. is we're not pulling off the headlights, the crash bar, the whole front structure of this car, because we don't plan on pulling the transmission. We are going to disconnect this from the transmission in hopes that we can pull it forward far enough and lift it up out of the car. If that doesn't work, then we will pull up the front and we'll pull the whole thing out, but this will save us a lot of time if we don't need to remove the entire front end. It's so terrifying to see this motor out of this car, especially in the garage. Just the fact that I have not really technically pulled the motor and reinstalled it or built it. I have removed a few motors, but I was never there for the full process of reinstalling it. At this moment in time, we still do not know the cause of the metal shavings. When we did check the shaft, everything looks fine. There's just very minor grooves on like a few of them, but nothing to be concerned about. Then as far as the one rod bearing we checked, which is already bolted back up, it was completely a-okay, no concern there. The oil pan doesn't really have any shadings in it. There was a few that I found yesterday. They were kind of bigger, which was not really comfortable feeling knowing how big they were, but there's not many of them, so it could be good and bad news. Let's talk about the shell of the BMW M4. So we were going to drive this thing to Gatlinburg here in a couple weeks, and it wasn't going to be in the show or entered in the show because of all of its flaws. After we finished this car, we wrapped it, we pulled it out in the sun, and within about 3 hours of this thing sitting in the sun, it just started failing so epically where I'm like embarrassed by the car. Like, see the bubbles in the carbon? And then you see the back. This is not good at all, and it's made me embarrassed by the car because it's such a sick car on photos and videos, but in person, someone walks up to it and they're freaking out about how cool it is, and they'll instantly be touching the car or pointing at it, which is really crappy. So that being said, we are working on version 2. We're going to have to pull out the whole interior and the trunk liner to get this wide body off. We're going to pull the wrap off. We're going to have a new front bumper, a new rear bumper, and we're basically revamping the entire car. I have more mods for it as well, but this is going to be part of the series. In the meantime, as I am going to start disassembling this car, we are going to go back and watch the time lapse of this motor being disassembled. Has anyone else been to this point where they just kind of feel stressed out due to all these parts? It's absolutely insane. I do want to mention we missed the time lapse on removing the pistons. We removed the crank so we can inspect the main bearings. I want to say the rod bearings are definitely not bad at all. We're going to replace them, obviously. The engine has 40,000 miles on it, pretty much exactly. But it's not the concern of why we have so many metal shavings in the filter. Here are the main bearings. Again, it's good that we're replacing them, but it's not any concern. The worst of it is probably this right here, but my finger doesn't even catch it. That being said, that's probably caused by one of those metal shavings. Still, where did the metal shavings come from? I have no idea. We've pulled apart the vacuum, we've pulled apart everything but the oil filter housing. Check the turbos as well. This is the last thing I'm going to go ahead and pull apart and see if anything is causing those shavings. This is CNC made, and I had no concerns installing it, and I don't see anything on forums of those causing issues. So I truly don't think that's going to be an issue. Did we really just pull this engine apart for absolutely no reason? I really think we did. And we're not doing this as some like joke where we're actually going to build this motor. We're not building this motor. We're going to do upgrade bearings, and I'm going to replace the Vanos again just because. But we're not doing pistons, we're not doing rods. All this is a pretty much big waste of time and a headache. As you can tell behind me, the M4 is stripped out. It has no more wrap, no more wide body. The next video is about the chassis and what we're doing to it. So stay tuned for that. From this point forward, we're gonna go ahead and buy all the gaskets that we need, all the bearings, and probably do some research on piston rings. But man, please, somebody, I need help on this one. This is crazy. Thankful for friends, thankful for the assistance from Ethan on this motor. Honestly, if it wasn't for him coming and helping, I don't know if this would have ever been taken apart, and what I would have done with the car, I have no idea. But that's it. Just keep living life, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Sheesh. The engine bay is so clean though. I spent some time power washing it the other day. It looks good.